Thanks for joining me. This lab session is entitled Recording Project Scripts Part 2. Here is the lecture and lab plan for the WebTours Performance Test Project using JMeter. Items 5 and 6 remain. I want to demo the individual scripts in more detail and discuss the process of recording and merging again to be sure I don't lose you as we proceed with this test project in the remaining course sessions. The first individual script we were talking about was the login logout script, and we covered most of what I wanted to talk about concerning that particular script. But one thing I want to communicate, one is having to do with think time, and here's the reason why. This particular script is intended to be an emulation of people who log into applications, and sometimes in anticipation they will just remain logged in thinking they will do some function within the application at some point in the course of their time in the application. So they will stay logged on and eventually log off. Sometimes because they've decided, well, they don't think they're going to do anything, or because they have done something and now they feel like they're done. So in this particular script, we have two think times, and we're using another event excuse me, called flow control action for both of these think times. And this one is a simple one that you can specify a duration here. In this case, the first one, the duration is 2,000 milliseconds, which is 2 seconds. And what I'm going to do is take the other one, which is only 250, and change that to 3,000. That way, we'll have a total of 5 seconds of think time associated with that particular script to give it some time to sit there before it actually logs off. Okay? Now, let's go ahead to the next one. The register. That particular script has a counter like the other did in order to increment the value so that it keeps selecting a different user ID for the amount of users that are going to be utilizing the register function. And so here is the actual function under this tran code, or under this transaction controller. And here are the events or HTTP requests. And you'll notice that the password and username is specified here, but there's no values, so we're not actually passing any of that data at this point. But in here, we are. We see the username. We see that's being used for password, password confirm, and username. And we just gave some bogus names to the first name and last name, J and user. And that's okay. Address is bogus as well. Just something to populate those variables with values. Let's move on. We don't see anything else that's important. One more time. Okay, good. And we have a debug sampler in here to pick up the data, see what variable and what values are being used at any given time. Next one is the flight pay. This is the full function where flights are scheduled and itineraries are created for a given user. So here is the first time we see, notice we didn't see a login for register. It doesn't because it's before you actually log in. You're just using it to create users. Whereas with the flight pay, you actually logged in first. And so that's the reason for seeing the TC login, just like you saw with the login logout. And we have the preprocessor, JSR 223. And this one has some code in it. And you'll see that it's using FTP prefix, which is going to be the value FTP placed in A, and then the FTP user, which coming from the counter, it will start out with 1. So we would have FTP1, and that's been put together into this variable S, and then S is put into, this is what the vars.put is, to create this variable name, FTP user name. So that value that's in S then gets populated into this variable, and that variable can be utilized further down in the script. And we have a log.info, and as I mentioned earlier, that this one is used to print that value in the log, or to display the value in the log. So we would see that in the log output. And we have the module controllers for the login, log off process. If I click on that, we notice that has not been set. And so I'm going to go ahead and set it now. We expand the test fragment, and we want login A process. Now that's set. We go to the login C, expand test fragment, click login C, go to modular controller for logout, expand test fragment, select log off. So now we have those all set for the flight pay thread, and we also have a debug sampler. So the piece we did not expand is the flight pay process itself, which is going to go through a welcome page, flight selection, find flight 1, find flight 2, 2 different pages for the flight, then the payment detail, and finally the invoice. When we get to the invoice, we now have a scheduled flight, and it has been paid for by credit card. Okay, so we will collapse that and collapse this and go to flight change. And in flight change, we have a similar structure here. The counter, let me just look at that one, and you'll see it has a different variable name, FCH user, and that's what's going to be processed here, FCH username, and FCH user is used to create the B variable, which are then combined into the S variable, and then finally they're put into this FCH username variable, which will be utilized in the script, and the current user would be displayed on the log. We have the module controller, and if we expand the flight change process, we see find flight 2, payment detail, and returning. There's a couple of returns because it's a change process. We're going back to the previous pages that we stepped through up to payment detail. We're going back and updating those, and then coming back to finally the flight invoice, which actually pays for the flight and schedules the itinerary. And if we expand on TC login, we see these other module controllers. Check that. Expand test fragment. We want login A. For C, expand the test fragment, we want login C. And for, we should have a log off process right down here. And we expand and select log off. Now, that one is ready. We'll go to the next one. The next one is flight inquiry. We see the preprocessor, and we see we're taking in FIN user. We combine the two values into S, and then S is used to create the FIN user name variable. And we have one statement for displaying it on the log as before. And let's open up the TC login process. We have the two module controllers, one for A and one for C. I'll go ahead and select those, A and C. And just in case you forgot about the login B, or you're thinking I'm forgetting about the login B, basically we showed you before that we're using it as input to display it, the combination to show that user ID on the module control, I'm sorry, not on the module controller, on the HTTP request, we see this communication. So each time we process a user, we'll display the user ID. We've done C, selected login C. We scroll down to the log out module controller and select log off. Now that one's ready. Then we'll skip these two for now. The itinerary thread, same structure. We'll go to the login, quickly select login A, and for login C, we'll select login C. And for module controller log out, we'll select log off. And we're done with that one. For the final one here, we see it's still the same structure, and we have the preprocessor, which is showing FCA prefix. That's going into A, and FCA user variable value is going into B. We combine it into S, and then use S to put it into FCA username. And we have a statement again that will send that value to the log to display. We go into the expanding the TC login. We have the controller for login A. We select from the test fragment A, and we have C. From the test fragment we select, from the test fragment we select C. And for the logout, from the test fragment we select log off. And we're done. So now we have gone through these threads. We've given you a little bit more information to understand what these are for, and they correlate to what we saw on the workload diagram, and we have seen that when we look at the thread group, we see the loop count that's appropriate for the number of users that are going to be processed during this function or script. And we could have had it where we had 16 number of threads instead of loops. The difference there is the processing of users. It would have then been better to have user IDs in a file that we read in and process, but because we have the IDs identified programmatically as part of the loop process, then it's easier to do it this way. So you do have options on that, and one is good for certain processings and the other is good for others. In this case, I chose to go this route. Okay, I think we're fairly close to having communicated all we need to talk about now. We'll be coming back to this script, this main script, several times in the next coming sessions. One more thing to cover is the recording process one more time. If we wanted to record a new script to add to this main script, what would we do? Well, we know that if we created it externally, we could use the merge and then add it to this script and attach it to the end. Well, we can also create a new script inside this main script. So how do we do that? Well, for starters, we need the recording controller. And the second thing we need is the test recorder element. So let's start with the recorder controller. We want to add it in at the end here. So what we do is we go to the top here and we're going to select first a thread. But before I select that, I want to show you what happens if you went ahead and got the excuse me, I'm in the wrong place. If we went and got the controller first. So if I go to here, and let's say I want to add a logic controller, and the name of it is the recording controller. Okay, so I can do that. Now, do I want the code? What would happen is if I get into a recording mode, then all of the events are going to be underneath this existing thread group. Is that what I really want? Can I move this somewhere else? Well, I can try. Notice what happens. I either have the ability to copy it when you see this symbol, or it shows me a symbol that says I cannot do anything with it. I can't copy it there. So it will probably go back and forth with that. And if I go all the way down to the end, can I just add it to the end? Let's see. I have a line, and it's showing that I cannot do that. I cannot insert it in here. I can do it here at this last thread. But that's what I did in the first place, was I found that I could select that controller from any thread group element. All right, so let's say that's not what we want to do. So what did it do? Did it put it back where it was? Let's find out. We had it here, and there it is. So we're going to remove this. It's useless to us. Sorry, remove. Yes. Now, what we need is a thread group first. So, if we go back up and we select the test plan, add, we can go to the thread group and we can add a thread group. And it's going to add it near the bottom. Here it is. Now, we can take that thread group and we can say, let's move it to where, let's collapse this. All right, and collapse this one. And collapse that one. So now, we can see it more easily, and we can move this thread group up after the last one. Now it's in sync with everything else. Now what we need is a recording controller. So we have the logic controllers. We can select recording controller. Now that's in the proper place underneath a thread group, and any recorded events would go underneath this recording controller. One more thing we need in order to do recording here is we need the non-test element. If we go back up here to the top, add non-test element and test script recorder. Select that, and there we want to right click one more time, add a listener, such as the view results tree. That's the most common one we use in order to see what's actually happening during the recording process. Excuse me. So now we have the thread group, a new thread group, recording controller. We have the test script recorder, and on the test script recorder, we can select where we want the output, the events that are recorded, to go to. And you can see it's become a long list because of all the scripts that are within this main script. We want thread group recording controller. This is the one. So now that says it's all of the events that are recorded are going to be stored underneath recording controller. When that is done, then we can take the recording controller and do the change controller to select, say, the transaction controller, or the simple controller, or the runtime controller. Any of those can be utilized in this case. We'll, of course, then change the thread group name to something appropriate that goes in line with the other individual scripts. And then once we're done also, we can get rid of these two statements just by doing a remove. So that explains how it is we set up to do recording a brand new script inside the main script. And of course we use the start button to start that process. We have to make sure that the browser is in sync with the port, and then everything will work properly, and you'll have a recorded script in the recording, under the recording controller, and you go from there. My time has ended for this session. I thank you for yours. Join me in the next video.